Hello, everybody. My name is Sil, the DM, and we are here with our Frontier Reclamation recap. Um, Today's session was a lot of fun. We opened up with Emerald and Rodin at Kilgrave Academy, where they had left off. Um, Emerald wanted to do a little shopping while they waited for everyone else to get back. Um, And so Rodin took Emerald to the Academy store, since Emerald was looking for a particular magical item. Um, a bag of holding. Inside, they discovered a human member of the Academy, Supply Sergeant Daniels, who had 3 bags of holding in stock. One that could hold 250 pounds, and then 2 others that were considerably larger and exponentially more expensive. Um, and already it was a bit too much for a Merrill to afford, but Rodin did mention that students uh, get a discount at the school's store. Um, though Rodin didn't mention that the discount is proportionate to the student's rank. Um, and Merrill thought that this was Rodin offering uh, to buy it with their discount instead of implying that a Merrill should possibly join the school. Uh, and they did end up buying the bag. It ended up costing like 350 gold for the smallest of the 3 bags of holding. Um, After shopping around in there for a little while, the pair of them went back outside just as the rest of the party was arriving. Um, the rest of the party had been at Noltessa's, a elven uh, druid, uh, or half elf. They're not really sure what she is. Um, this druid who has a ritual that they could use to perform that would be able to repair Vanya's limb. And by the time they met up with Emerald and Rodin, it's about 2 in the afternoon. And they all chatted for a little bit and caught up and figured out what they needed. Rodin, still wanting to help, uh, mentioned that they were looking for an Umberhulk's arm as one of the material components for the spell, the claw of an Umberhulk. Um, Rodin mentioned that he was aware that the school had several in their possession, and since his instructor already seemed interested in their party after they had dealt with the imps, he could see if the instructor could give them something like that. So they waited in the school for a little bit, and for the other party members who hadn't been to Kilgrave before, it was a bit of an experience seeing the vast fields and training regiments all going down at once. Um, Hifir used this opportunity to get some sausages from the school cafeteria as he was still quite hungry after the dinner at Little Garden, lunch. Um, and Rodin returned, looking a little concerned, saying that Instructor Voltaire was more than willing to provide them with an Umberhulk, which the party very, very astutely went, that doesn't sound like an Umberhulk's claw, that sounds like an Umberhulk. And he went, well, that's right. Um, and basically, the instructor said that if they had an hour to prepare, and they would have one of their fields made ready, and the party could take down an Umberhulk themselves, they could keep it. If the school had to intervene to save them and stop the fight, then they lost their right to it. The party, several of whom had already blown through most of their spells fighting a cadre of imps, uh, very panically began asking for more time. And it was at that point that Shay leaned forward and said, you know, if you gave us a night to prepare, you'd be in for a much better show. And Rodin took that message to his instructor, who seemed very intrigued by this, and agreed. So they now have access to an Umberhulk the next day. Um, at noon, they're going to need to fight it, and we'll see how that goes when it happens. Um, After doing all this, it was about 3:30, 4ish in the afternoon, and they went shopping. They went to a botanist first, a florist. They went to this beautiful little shop called the Lotus Field, um, which has an enchantment on the roof so that when you're inside it looks open air and just lets sun pour in onto the plant life. Um, Roden spoke with the owner a little bit. A elf woman named Yon Ha. Let me grab my book here and take a look at her name. I believe it's Yon Ha. Yun Ha, that's correct. Um, and they ended up purchasing a sprig of ice petal for 50 gold because it is local to this duchy, but it is still very hard to acquire. Though most florists in the inner city would have a few of it, um, it can be a little expensive. And it was at this point that Zane decided that they were fine keeping their prosthetic the way they were now, so that the group didn't need to purchase a second flower. Um, After doing this, which only took about 20 minutes, it was a brief conversation. Though afterwards, Shay did purchase a flower for every member of the party, having the florist pick something that the party would like. So basically, I just let each player pick a flower for themselves. Um, though for Hefir, the woman gave him a red lilac, and for Roden, a blue forget-me-not, uh, which seemed to have some sort of effect on Roden. It was quite clear that she and Roden were friends, based on their conversation. After which, the party went to a jeweler, and Roden considered some options looking at the party, trying to find a place where they could theoretically get their emerald for cheap, and took him to a large building called the Rolling Stones, which looks almost like a trio of boulders sort of built onto each other that are in mid roll. Here they met a dwarven woman named Alara. Um, and upon talking to her for a little bit, she did have the emerald they were looking for, and even offered to sell them to them at a discount of 50% if they would help with some work, because she runs the store on her own, and sometimes work piles up. So the party spent 3 hours down in a hot workshop lifting crates that have like 600 pounds of stone in them, from one part of the workshop over to the other, and Shay spent the entire time cracking geodes. Um, After which they enjoyed some lemonade and some idle conversation uh, before heading back up and purchasing their emerald. At which point the group left, and they had really just one more place to go, which seemed to make Rodin a little uncomfortable. Navat had suggested they go to a chop shop, a place that uh, not Hefir, sorry, Rodin had mentioned earlier in the day as being an alternative to the school if they were looking for an Umber Hulk part. Um, or no, Noltessa had mentioned them. Um, Stores that specialize in monster parts and ingredients. Um, and Rodin, who, as a vegetarian, just seemed to not enjoy those shops. So they went to the first one, a place called Parts and More, which seemed to be like a hunter's paradise. And spoke to the owner there, big burly human covered in tattoos and scars. Um, but he apparently didn't have any Umber Hulk or any space for an Umber Hulk body. Because again, right now they're not looking to buy an arm; they're looking to um, find someone willing to buy the rest of the body off of them, believing they could turn a bit of a profit. And after Parts and More, excuse me, after Parts and More didn't have the space, they decided to check an alternative. The Rodin wouldn't even go into this one. So they went into what was very clearly a butcher shop, like meat hanging everywhere's, cool storage boxes set up with glass windows that were frosted, showing frozen exotic meats, and a front counter which had a lot of ground meat inside and all sorts of labels and prices. The shop in questions was named in Orcish as Gruchschlotter, or the slaughterhouse. Um, and while in there, they sort of rings a bell as you walk through the door. Um, a woman called out from the back room that she'd be with them in a moment, and they heard very clearly her cleaving through a piece of meat and bone rather noisily. Before she came into the room, this thin elf woman just splattered in blood over her white butcher uniform or outfit. Uh, and she came up and spoke to the party. Um, and a lot of the people in the party were a little unnerved by her. She seemed a little unhinged. Um, and when the party seemed to be suggesting that they were bringing down an Umber Hulk at Kilgrave the next day, and were looking to sell the party, she seemed to get almost ravenously hungry at the thought of that. Um, and said if they were able to follow through on their end of the bargain, she'd be willing to pay them 1,000 gold once the thing was dead and the body was brought to her by uh, her agents. She did say that she had a relative who worked at the school and could arrange to have the carcass brought directly to her, um, upon which she'd be willing to pay them. And the party, satisfied with that, quickly excused themselves, except for Navat, who seemed to be having fun with the woman's demeanor. And Rodin, who was still quite uncomfortable, uh, it said that whenever she looked at him, he got the feel that she wanted to take a bite out of him, and it just made him a little uneasy. Uh, After this, with the day done and 2 out of the 3 material components gathered, the party went to Barramon's and sat down to eat and drink. Hafir seemed a little nervous, since he would have to be fighting an Umber Hulk the next day, which caught some of the party a little off guard. And they're like, "Were you planning to fight with us?" And he was like, "Well, you're my friends, of course." Uh, which really embarrassed him. It was a good moment, as Hafir, of course, uh, was going to help them. So everyone drank a little bit, and Hefir and Rodin borrowed Echo's room and excused themselves for a bit, as Hefir seemed to want to talk to Rodin. About 45 minutes or so passed, and most of the rest of the party at this point was dancing and singing and having a good time. But Meryl and Vanya in particular were just sort of enjoying the room, people watching. And they noticed Rodin come down looking rough. At least Meryl noticed he was looking a little rough. Um, he offered them a smile and a wave and then left, presumably to head back to his dorm, where he had thought about offering them a room at the Gravestone Inn, across from the academy where he lives. Um, but it is against the policy of the dorm to allow non-students into the school into it, like, for the night. They are allowed guests, but having someone stay over at the dorm is like an expellable offense. Which, when he revealed that to them earlier, made Shay and Vanya a little nervous, since they very clearly had spent the night there the night before, and perhaps put the shadiness of the woman at the counter's demeanor into better light. Um, and Rodin quickly sort of excused himself and left, but Ameril, wanting to follow to make sure he was okay, excused himself. And while Ameril was following along with Rodin, uh, Hefir and Vanya had a bit of a moment with each other. Uh, where Vanya was sort of teasing and trying to convince Hefir to go dance with Echo. Um, and they had a bit of a moment where Vaughn got a bit of an insight into Hefir's personality and his feelings at the moment. But I won't go into detail very much with the next few parts because they were done in private. And I think that these are conversations that, if they're going to come up in character for the other parties members to learn, they should come up in character. Um, Though I can't stop any of the players out of character from discussing what happened. I'm never going to apply that restriction on any of them. But I'll apply it to myself as much as I damn well please. So sorry, Echo, if you wanted to know what Hayfair said when he was sitting with Vanya. You're not hearing it from me. Also, sorry, the rest of the party. If you wanted to know what a Meryl found out with Rodin, you're also not hearing it from me. The Wamero did follow Rodin all the way back to the academy, and instead of going to his dorm, he walked further, heading into the park. Eventually, the two of them sat at a bench, a druid crafted wooden bench, by a lake in the park, and had a conversation for quite some time. It was about 2 hours and 45 odd minutes before Merrill returned to find a slightly tipsy Hayfair and a fairly sloshed Vanya, as the two of them had been drinking while everyone else was partying. Um, and very quickly, the party went to bed. Um, Hayfair joining Echo in their private room. And the two of them had a bit of a conversation and a nice moment together before we faded to black. Uh, Waking up the next day, they enjoyed a hearty breakfast at the Barramond Inn, uh, and a bit of conversation with Beret, Barramond's daughter, um, who seemed to have been flirting with Zane, but Zane wasn't picking up what she was putting down, which is fair. After which the party set out, prepared to take on an Umber Hulk, and made their way to the academy, where they met Rodin, who was back to his smiling, charming, cocky self, and was waiting for them. Uh, and he led them into the back, where they distinctly noticed that there was a lack of students around the academy, the least amount they had seen, at least. It wasn't empty, it wasn't a ghost town, but there was definitely a lack of students. And as they were led back into the yard between two buildings, they quickly realized why. Um, the field that they had noticed the day before, one with two trees, a few large boulders, areas that were very clearly constructed with rubble, a man made river and lake, or pond, really. Calling it a lake is a little disingenuous. It's like 20 feet across. Um, and a large, thick bush area that again seemed man made. And on the other side of this field, there are bleachers, or like large bleachers, and they're just full of students. And in between the two bleachers is a large, sort of elevated observation deck. Um, and on the observation deck, they spotted five people. One who Merrill recognized as Instructor Volten, this extremely aged human. Um, oh, I don't know what I just hit, but it made a noise. Beyond that, they noticed an elven woman who was missing her left arm and her right ear. A halfling who was sort of sitting up on a stool cross-legged with very black curly hair, and sharp eyes, and a bit of a goatee. A human who they recognized as having been the same young-ish looking human who they had seen in Ezra's office the morning before. Um, who seemed to be upset and demanding to speak with the Duchess. And the last one was a human with very chocolatey tan skin, and sort of flowing green hair that was sort of streaked with black, whose eyes were covered by a bandage that seemed to be tied tightly, with a lot of extra fabric in the back, creating a pair of twin tails. Um, and Rodin, upon seeing them, seemed to be like very nervous and mentioned that he didn't expect all five of them to be here. And he turned and looked back at the party and said, "You better give them one hell of a show." And that's where we ended. So we're going to be picking up with the next session directly into the fight, which is exciting. If anyone has any questions, comments, or inquiries about the setting or the characters involved, please ask. I won't spoil things in the comments, but I'm more than willing to expand if any of my players or anyone else listening is curious. Um, yeah. Thank you for coming by, listening. Have a great day.